This is the Thought Leaders Podcast.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Thought Leaders Podcast. Hope you've all been doing very well. Today, I am joined by Sherell Dorsey. I am super happy about this. She's an incredible woman. She is the founder of The Plug, a digital platform that covers the Black tech sector. We're going to get into a lot of exciting things today. Sherell, how you doing?
I am doing well, very well. Thank you so much for having me today.
My pleasure. So first of all, thank you so much for joining us. Where are you calling in from?
So I'm based in Atlanta, Georgia, so just southeast in the USA here.
Okay, so before we start getting into The Plug, which is, again, as I mentioned on the intro, just a really incredible platform, shedding light on a lot of really, really cool companies and a lot of cool people. Why don't you talk me through a little bit about who you are, where you're from, and how you got into all of this?
Yeah, that's such a great way to start. I'm a Seattle, Washington native, so the land of Microsoft and Amazon and all of the great crunchy granola kind of starting tech companies in that space. I learned how to code in high school thanks to a great program that really made it possible for kids of color to get onboarded into tech. I come from a highly technical family. My grandfather was just a tremendous technophile who also made sure that we all had computers and were kind of actively ensuring that we were well acclimated to this world of technology. So just through the years, working in and out and around and adjacent to technology, be it for startups, ranging from beauty to fashion, into also working formally as a marketing manager for Uber, and then eventually within sales and marketing, as a contractor for Google Fiber. Some of my most important and most significant and impactful work really came at the hands of leveraging data to help tell and shape stories about how technology was impacting society. And around that time as well, I was continue to stay abreast of the tech industry. And a lot of business and tech news really left out sort of the folks that I knew growing up and the mentors and folks that I had who were also technologists contributing to these major initiatives and these major new technologies. And I wanted to find a space, first of all, to have conversations about these incredible, bold technologists and leaders who looked like me, but then more important as well is really have this idea of rigorous reporting that would kind of show where people were starting and continue to follow their journey as they continue to rise up the ranks. And so The Plug was really born as I was working full time. I just kind of pulled together this daily tech newsletter. I had penned pieces for Fast Company and The Root and Black Enterprise on just trends that were shaping the Black innovation economy. And from there just said, I want to own my own platform. And, whether that is just kind of a labor of love that continues to move forward or something that becomes much more formalized. And that's really how The Plug was born. So leveraging a lot of that data and skill and technique, and then, using that as a way to tell these stories about what was happening in the world of Black innovation.
Okay, wow. So we have a lot to unpack here, and we'll take it bit by bit. So first of all, can I ask, how old are you?
I'm 33.
Okay, so I am 29, and I don't think I knew what the word coding was until about, I want to say maybe 10 years ago. So after I graduated high school, and you touched on that you had already been coding, or you got your intro to coding in high school, which is really interesting. So how did that come about? Because I, again, no idea when I was your age, any idea what coding was.
Yeah, honestly, my mom found this program. It was called the Technology Access Foundation, and they were literally teaching us after school programming languages like JavaScript, C#, some network administration, which I really loved. And then over the summers, we would work at a tech company. And so I worked every single summer at Microsoft. So from the time I was 14 to the time I was 18, when I graduated and went off to college, I was working in various capacities for different factions of the business, whether I was helping to manage a lab or create at the time, I don't even know if we had language for this, but it was animated GIFs, which are really huge now, but back then we were using them as tutorials to teach people software. And so it was pretty fascinating. I didn't realize how novel and important it was at the time, because a lot of folks, especially the nerdy folks, they kind of were already learning how to code in their basement. And I don't know if you remember the whole Guides for Dummies, that big, thick yellow book, right? Exactly. It's all of my nerdy friends had that book somewhere in their house. It was Intro to HTML for Dummies or C# programming for Dummies. And so it was a lot of tapping into that. And then I was really fortunate to be taught by other like software programmers and engineers, through this like completely free program that also helped us interview and get jobs over the summer. So I always had a great summer job.
Well, that's awesome. So that you got started early, which anyone listening, go expand your horizons. Do something. You're in high school, you're listening, do something out of the box. Doesn't matter what people think. But so you started this. Now, I know obviously a large part of what you're doing with the plug is shedding a positive light, obviously, on Black innovation and the tech sector. So were you kind of one of the only Black students in the program, or was it a diverse crowd?
From the programming classes?
Programming and Microsoft.
Yeah, actually, it was the classes and courses themselves were specifically designed for inner city kids and kids of color in particular. So it was a lot of obviously like traditionally kind of Black Americans. We had an influx of East Africans and refugees that had come to the States and landed in Seattle. And so we had just a great diversity of folks from all over. Seattle is a very highly Asian population as well. So there just was a great kind of mix of folks. So those are the people that I learned from, and those are kind of also the representation of the instructors that I had as well. Now, going to Microsoft was definitely a different kind of mix as well. The Seattle campus, I think, was highly diverse, but of course, like once you start to break down into teams, a lot of white guys, right? And so what was cool about my experience was that Microsoft, particularly within the internship program, was very intentional about matching us up with women mentors and folks of color. So even if my kind of everyday work experience wasn't the most diverse, we also had like lunches or presentations or tours that had much more representation so that we could see a bunch of different kind of folks in different kinds of roles. And that's not to say that, like my white male bosses weren't mentoring me as well, or kind of sharing with me their perspectives and their journeys. It was such a collaborative environment to learn from people who I normally may have not interacted with. And so, again, like being able to switch teams every 4 years, I got to experience a different side of the campus. I had office mates who were from India, who had just come to the States. And so it was a really enriching and very culturally diverse experience. And so I'm really thankful that was my foundation before going into the world of tech, because I would have thought that only one kind of person or one kind of background, was in tech. And that just wasn't my case early on as a teenager.
Right. So first of all, I'm here in Tel Aviv, and when I think of Silicon Valley and the whole tech scene, right? It's funny that I said Silicon Valley. I think of the show, right? Like the white nerdy guys. Have you seen the show? Yeah, and it's a funny show, and it's great, and it's comedy, so that's great. But it's so, as someone from an outsider looking in, it's really refreshing to hear that there is so much, or there is diversity out in the tech world. And I definitely want to also touch on the fact that you're a woman and how that has shaped your early career. Because I know today a lot of things are being done in the best possible way. I know She Code's out there, and there's a lot of women in tech verticals or organizations or programs out there. But I think you might have been a little bit ahead of the curve on getting into that, right?
Yeah, I mean, when I think about it, and even just as you're mentioning, I'm thinking, wow, like my experience was definitely extremely unique and definitely curated for my benefit in terms of having Trish Maline-Zizico, who was a retired Microsoft software engineer, Black woman, kind of early millionaire, and started this entire program that I got to attend. So it was like I did not see women in leadership roles or see women or women of color, particularly within tech. And so I was very confused when making that transition into, my adulthood and sort of early career, because that's all I knew was that level of representation. So in some regard, it's kind of like the world that we talk about today and the initiatives today that are being amplified and being much more invested in, 15 years ago, almost 20 years ago, I had that experience. And that world, I realized, was so unique for me and the folks who were joining me in that space. And I realized how much of a privilege, that was for me. I remember, Microsoft, and I still think they do this today, but they had a Digi Girls camp. And literally, like, they would have girls of all ages coming to campus for a week to learn and hear from other women in tech. And I think that program probably has to be at least 20, 25 years old. Now, in terms of scale, I'm not sure that every single campus has that program, but I had the benefit of growing up in Seattle, right? So it's like down the street, there was always access to these conglomerations of technology versus maybe someone that might be growing up in Omaha, Nebraska may not have that same level of access. So I have to recognize that, there's this kind of whole saying of like, oh, being born on third base. Like there's so many different kinds of privilege and there's so many different kinds of like where you were born, who you were born to, like those kinds of things definitely, play a role in your experience. But my mom's not a technologist. She just saw this program and said, I think this is going to be interesting for you. Let's give it a shot. And thankfully, I stuck with it for 4 years in a row. And in addition to having those internship experiences, some of the job training that they provided, I learned how to pass the whiteboard test at 14. Like that, when I think back to my experience having to take apart a computer, put it back together and test the software in front of my employer, like I was doing that at 14, 15 years old. And I never thought twice about it because it seemed like, well, this is just what it takes to work in the world. And so now, 15 years later, looking at how much of a knowledge gap there is, again, it makes me realize like, wow, Sherell, you were really in a unique position and very fortunate to have had those early experiences to shape even the way that I approach the way I tell stories about folks of color in tech today through the plug.
Yeah. So I think just from listening to that, I think that, and I don't even know if you've necessarily done this on purpose, but kind of how you had your mentors, right, who were able to help you. I think with the plug, you have adopted the role of those mentors, and now you're able to kind of in a different way, right? Not necessarily hands-on, but just sharing stories. And a lot of times, storytelling is the most powerful tool out there, right? It's not necessarily because first of all, you're going to be able to hit a lot more people with a story, and it also, plays on emotion in a good way as opposed to just, teaching someone a skill or something like that. So yeah, speaking of the plug, so would you kind of walk me through the beginnings of that and what kind of for those who are listening who don't know what it is, what it's all about?
Yeah, absolutely. So we're a subscription-based digital news and insights platform. We cover the Black innovation economy. So that's everything from startups that are emerging to how venture financing is taking shape to workforce initiatives that are affecting communities of color, policies that are affecting communities of color, and also just the tech industry at large and like how that breaks down when you have executives taking on new posts that look like, the Black and brown communities in which they come from. And so, the initial idea for me was really just about starting to have more dialogue and really starting to follow these folks in these companies because they were missing from the day-to-day tech news cycle, at least from what I was reading. And I felt like it wasn't just about aggrandizing people. It was about having a critical lens about the technologies that were being built and to start studying closely how people were thinking and what they were doing. So it wasn't just about like having positive news. It's more about if I'm reporting from a Bloomberg or I'm reporting from a Wall Street Journal, I'm taking the lens that my audience is intelligent. I'm taking the lens that they are investors, that they're looking for new business opportunities. They're looking to stay informed about where the future of technology, society, business is going. So why are we not applying the same lens when we talk about folks of color or women or other underrepresented minorities in technology? We kind of aggrandize people in this kind of false pandering language instead of just saying like, this is what they're building, this is what the trend looks like, and here's kind of what is going to be shaping the future and why this is so, tangential to all the things that are taking shape, above and beyond. And the biggest thing too was it wasn't just about having a feature story saying great things about a founder. It was also about how do we leverage data in a way that's going to be meaningful and useful to people. So I actually ended up leaving the workforce, going back to grad school, and I did a data and journalism master's degree at Columbia with the idea of kind of combining these hybridic computational skills with the storytelling to create these databases and data sets and like really learning how to critically take a look and analyze data and information to find unique and interesting stories that just weren't being told in a meaningful way. One of the data sets that I pulled together in grad school was on like Black-owned co-working spaces in the US. And that really just came out of the question of like co-working spaces are popping up all over the place. Like obviously there was WeWork, kind of like massively funded co-working space, but then we started to see these Black-owned co-working spaces that kind of had this double meaning of, yes, innovation, work, community, what have you, in addition to how these physical spaces were transforming how people were seeing Black people in innovation. So, that's kind of a long response to your question, but really, the plug is we endeavor, and of course, as I've been building this kind of slowly and as intentionally as possible, we really endeavor to have the matching of high quality journalism with high quality data that executives and policymakers and researchers can really use and leverage as we continue to tell this inclusive story about the future of society and technology.
Okay, awesome. I mean, that's again a lot to unpack, but that's no, it's very interesting. It's very cool to hear, and as you know, this is the Thought Leaders podcast, so we really like to get down to the nitty gritty in how people, especially exclusively content creators, how they really got their start. So, can you walk me through that first? How maybe the idea first cultivated in your head, and then kind of how you actually put it on paper and into the world.
Yeah, I'd love for it to be like this great grand story of genius. And, honestly, I literally just took like a free MailChimp account and GoodBits and just started putting together a newsletter and bought my like $10 domain name. And I was like, listen, I'm just going to put together a daily newsletter Monday through Friday.
What year was this?
This was 2016.
Okay.
This was like middle of 2016, and I was still working at the time. I think I was at Google Fiber at the time, and I would just get up at like 5, 6 a.m. and like pull my thoughts together on like the state of the Black tech ecosystem, or just interesting things that were happening, be it conferences or just people that like I shared a meal with and thought they had interesting things to say. There were no frills. I think I like found someone on Instagram to make a logo for me. And I just kind of was like, this could turn out to be absolutely nothing. But right now, like, I didn't want to put pressure on myself to actually create a business. I was just like, this is a labor of love. Let's see if people are even interested in what's happening in Black tech news, kind of beyond what currently exists. And I just kind of went for broke. And my biggest thing, honestly, Ariel, was like, I just have to be consistent.
Right.
And I'll tell you, like, not every day was a complete win. It was a lot of like having to scrounge for interesting news. It was a lot of like, knowing that, hey, we had a couple hundred readers in the beginning and just kind of people who followed my work and other things that I penned for like Fast Company or The Root. And so, for me, it was just about being consistent. And about 6 months, I want to say about 6 months into it is when we got some outreach from like Capital One and some other folks who were like, hey, we love what you're doing. Is there a way that we can partner and help sponsor some of this? So, my first like real check like made it real for me that, hey, I can actually turn this into an interesting media platform. So it was very slow growing and slow growth. And like I said, I was working full time. I had just started applying to grad school. So it was very like very bare bones minimum, just like, let's just see what happens. And then from there, like, let's keep experimenting. And then if people really want this as like an actual publication, then, we'll grow into that.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think that your story has a lot of resemblance to a lot of the other people I'm interviewing on the show, where there's an idea that comes out, something that they're passionate about, and you throw the idea at the wall, and if it sticks, great. If it doesn't stick, also great, because you're enjoying it and you're having a good time and you're having fun just throwing it against the wall, which is, again, how a lot of these great content creators, including yourself, really, get their start. So I wanted to ask, was there a big void in the space beforehand? Was there no one at all doing what you were doing, or did you have some inspiration to kind of get the plug started?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I don't want to be remiss in that, Black Enterprise has always been that standout publication that's covered Black business and entrepreneurship and community. And I think that, there's also other folks who attempted to cover, Black tech kind of at scale, from like Black Web 2.0 by Angela Benton, who founded a new media accelerator, one of the first Black accelerators in Silicon Valley. There were, I think I want to say like Afrotech and Blavity were kind of coming into that space in a really interesting way. And so there was definitely some propensity towards, highlighting what was happening. But I think that what I brought into it was that sense of data and analysis and bringing together information in a way that folks had just not had before, right? It was more than just like telling the story and showing what people created. It was more of there's power in numbers. There was also the Project Diane report by Catherine Finney. I want to say she may have released that in, I don't know, maybe 2014, 2015. It was like the first time someone tried to map how many Black women had raised over $1 million in VC funding. And I don't think it was extremely like exhaustive, but it gave us a lens of that Black women were getting less than 0.5% of all VC dollars. And that information completely changed the conversation in venture capital. And then you started to see all these funds that were launching that were specifically geared towards Black and Latinx women. And so for me, it was like, the purpose of great journalism and great media is to change the status quo and to give people information that helps them to really reshape their thinking and challenge their ideas. And so from the onset, the visibility was one aspect for sure, but I think secondarily it was, listen, I'm probably not going to go be a VC. I'm probably not going to be the next Zuckerberg, right? Like that's not necessarily my goal. But I do want to acknowledge and map and create space and opportunity for the contributors to where we're headed in society to have their stories told and documented in a way that helps to get us all to the next level. And I think that's what I'm doing. I hope that's the impact that I'm having. And sometimes I also just want to tell a really dope ass story and that's it. And just like enjoy it. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, definitely. I think you definitely, what you're talking about with journalism is a very powerful message, and a lot of times, and I think that's should be the goal for anyone in the journalist world and trying to tell a story. So, if we just continue down, the growth story of the plug. So you had started this in 2016, and at what point did you say, okay, it's time to kind of take this to the next level? I'm going to go full in on this, and you really launched it to what it is today.
Honestly, it was, finishing grad school in 2018. And I think by that time, I started to feel and see this momentum. We striked a deal with Vice to do some co-publishing. We've gotten into the Informations Accelerator. And I just kind of had that moment of like, it's do or die, right? It's like, you've got one shot. I didn't have a ton of responsibilities, so I wasn't concerned about like immediately going back into the workforce. And it was like, look, you can go all in or you can treat this as a hobby, right? And so I kind of was just like, I think now is the time. And like, don't get me wrong at all. Like it has not been the easiest journey, especially trying to figure out like a business model where in journalism, majority of the advertising revenue has gone to, Google and Facebook. And so publishers everywhere have been struggling with how do you continue to grow a media publication in such a very tumultuous climate. And with being and having the resources at my disposal with like the information and kind of looking at the various business models around subscription, I thought, okay, I can't be the largest and I can't go and maybe raise $100 million, but we can be the most distinctive. And that's kind of just the energy I've tried to play off. Like, we've just got to be the most distinctive. I always tell people like, I was not the cool kid. I was always like only known because I was everywhere doing all the things and like trying to create some different kind of angle or momentum to whatever it is that I did. So it's like, I can stand out by the distinctiveness of my voice and the distinctiveness of my work. And so, and it's like, I was in grad school when like Gotham is shut down in New York City and journalists were being laid off left and right. And like, as you can imagine, like that was some scary shit, It's like, are you sure that you really want to go this route? And just everything in me just kept saying like, what else would you do, Sherell? Like what, like, I'd be more than well prepared to go back into a tech company and like maybe work on a communications team or a policy team. But like, what is keeping you up at night? Like, what do you feel like you're really purposed to do here on earth? And, the plug continued to be my answer. So like I said, I had to just kind of go full throttle following grad school. And so I look up 2 years later and we are definitely the furthest we've ever been.
That's amazing. So today, where are you guys at subscribers wise?
So we have several thousand subscribers, and we also have several hundred paid members. So I don't do like complete like numbers publicly, but we continue to grow every single day. And we definitely see and continue to see bumps. I think, especially following some of the protests here in the U.S., there's definitely an interest in terms of what's happening in Black innovation and Black life. So we definitely saw a tremendous uptick, following May, the death of George Floyd and others like Breonna Taylor and all of these, Black Americans who have died at the hands of police brutality. And so we're definitely seeing that uptick. But what's also been interesting too is that, we constantly get outreach from venture capitalists and other folks within business who are really just trying to learn and identify the space so that they are also increasing diversity within their portfolios. So it's been really interesting to kind of see how folks are starting to gravitate toward our work in a meaningful way.
Yeah. So I mean, again, everything you said, I think it's a really, really interesting and it's a great story. I know that the subscription-based newsletters and websites, those are just growing, and it's interesting because kind of as we're saying, like in 2018, it's a scary time, but we see a really nice uptick in. I like to say it's journalism and news with a personality, right?
Yeah.
Like it's not. I don't want to people. There are so many places today to get news, right? News is instantaneously at your fingertips. People want to gravitate towards something, first of all, that they identify with. But even if they necessarily don't identify with the message or anything, they want to like the personality of the publication. And I think that definitely shines through with the plug. So I kind of wanted to know how, first of all, how you and your staff work. Are you guys how are you kind of doing your research? Are you looking for stories or are people turning to you guys and hey, we're doing this cool thing? Because there is a lot of stuff going on, obviously, and you guys are just one publication.
Yeah, there's so much going on. And I mean, we're not a daily publication. We
Right.
went from a daily tech newsletter to a weekly briefing, and a Wednesday update with like jobs and opportunities. And so we publish about 3 times a week. And, for me, it's about like what's trending and what's timely, but also useful and just interesting information. I think a lot of people will pitch us and, I think sometimes like we might find some great stories that way. But honestly, we just kind of start with a question that no one may be asking, right? Like we have some great data fellows on the team this summer. And, one just, we started talking about like, well, how many like Black founders have actually had exits of their companies? Because we meet people who are like, yeah, I sold my company back. And it's like, where the heck is that data? And so, we did a piece on like 25 Black women whose companies had gotten acquired. And here's 25 more we think might be next. And so, it was like no one had ever asked that question. So we try to find like, what's the conversation here on the left that no one's talking about? Because everyone's over here talking about this, which is fine and great, but it trends in and it trends out. And like, how do we be distinctive? We set what the conversation should be. And so those are kind of the pieces that we try to dive into. And then sometimes we'll partner up with other initiatives, particularly around our sponsored content. Like New Profit has this incredible $6 million challenge specific to investing in entrepreneurs that are helping to upskill Americans for the future of work. Because as you know, like in the US, COVID and our kind of economic decline has laid off a ton of people. Right. And a lot of folks who may never get their jobs back. And so, we did an entire sponsored series with New Profit on the future of work and really talking about here are some of the Black tech leaders who are creating opportunities for training and for learning and certification so that folks can get back to work, a lot sooner, who still need to be in the workforce for the next 20, 30 years of their lives. And, we've done some great things with the Kauffman Foundation as well, specifically covering ecosystems, like what's taking shape in places like a Birmingham, Alabama around tech and training. So we try to touch on a variety of topics, but really think smartly about, again, like what's not being covered or being analyzed. And not every story is like deeply data driven. Like some are kind of generally like, here's a conversation. Like obviously future work is a big topic globally. So we try to make sure that the lens is, definitely highly focused on, Black people in the future of work. And who's doing what. So that's really how we kind of think about our content and our stories.
Yeah. So you keep bringing up the idea of data. So first of all, I think it's very refreshing when someone tells a story with data, right? So, right, data is data, and that's the story, and then you could mold it around it, but the data is the data, right? So maybe you touched on this a little bit before, but can you walk me through kind of how you settled on that, and that's kind of the driving force and why you wanted to focus on that, and then also if you have maybe like your favorite piece content or data analysis that you put together.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a couple favorite pieces that I have. I think that what data helps us do, and quite honestly, I mean, if you're a journalist, especially working in business or what have you, the reality is we're all data journalists, right? We're all supposed to be using data for facts and to support our information. We should all be scanning publicly available data sets to make sure that like what we're talking about is backed up by facts or studies or what have you. And when I felt like when it came to talking about Black tech news, there just wasn't a ton of checking. I think that as we've all become like content creators in our own right, the art and science of journalism is still something that you have to be trained on. There's a certain level of ethics, there's a certain code of conduct that as a journalist, as a trained journalist, and it's no disrespect to the writers and to the bloggers, but the training of a journalist is very, very specific and distinctive. And I wanted to bring that back into the way in which we cover our news. And I wanted people to not refer to my site as a blog or to refer to me as a blogger. I'm like, no, I am a trained journalist at the end of the day, which means that I am tapping sources, I am checking information, I'm getting quotes, I'm confirming quotes, I'm fact checking as much as possible. And what I'm putting out there is not conjecture or opinion. Right? It is about true analysis. It's about truly discovering and finding, information that's going to be useful to the general public. Right? It's not just about getting eyeballs or clickbait. And so I wanted to return to the art and science of journalism that was significantly being lost because, again, everyone is creating content. Everyone is a media maker at this point. In terms of my favorite stories that we've done, definitely the Black-owned co-working space story when I did that a few years ago was pretty substantial. I think that also kind of catapulted the plug into a different sphere and kind of set us apart. We also did one on Black tech conferences growing across the US and sort of looking at places outside of Silicon Valley in New York City and really analyzing like these conferences weren't just great for community gathering and networking, but we were seeing larger companies tapping them for recruiting opportunities. And so as companies were saying like, hey, our recruiting pipeline is broken, how do we get access to more diverse candidates? They were starting to jump on the bandwagon with some of these places in like Indiana or Chicago, and really figuring out ways in which to tap into some local markets for new talent. I think recently, we did a piece on Andreessen Horowitz's Cultural Leadership Fund, which essentially kind of brought Black investors from like sports and entertainment into deals. And the premise of the fund was supposed to be designed towards supporting cultural leaders in helping to advance technology, society, and like there's also supposed to be some level of resources that are going to support nonprofits that are onboarding Black people into tech. And so I just kind of scraped their portfolio company list on their website to also see out of the 60 plus companies that they listed, that they invested in, how many companies were actually Black led or had a Black founder. And I think there were only 2 out of that. And the fund was about $16 million. And so they had some people who were coming just straight through Andreessen Horowitz, some people who weren't. That was a huge story for us because I wanted to demonstrate that, like, hey, sure, there's all these great platitudes around investing in Black founders or giving people opportunity, but there's not a ton of checks and balances when it comes to what does that look like. And a lot of firms are not forthcoming about what actual impact looks like. And so I upset a lot of people in Silicon Valley, but I was like, but this is the information you have on your site. Like, I literally just scraped it. And it's showing me that, yes, you've done X, Y, and Z, but I think we have a lot of firms that are on stages talking about let's help move the needle for Black founders. And there's not a lot of evidence that that's actually taking place. And so, and so that was just kind of like one prime example of journalism needs to hold these big messages that get pushed out in the media. Like, we have to make sure we're also holding folks accountable and checking up on what actual impact looks like. So yeah, that story also went viral.
Yeah, no, that's you've touched on something that I think, and myself as a content creator, right? I always look at myself as, okay, I'm telling a story, right? But when it comes to journalism, and at least what I was brought up, and I think a lot of people who are around our age were brought up on was, you find the statistics and you find the data, and then you tell the story around it. And a lot of times, unfortunately, it happens vice versa, right? Where you have a story and you kind of were saying like clickbaity things, and then you're going to find things to kind of make it work. But I think it's super refreshing, and I keep using that word, but it's true, that what you're doing, taking this classic journalism approach, which I think, again, yeah, it is really missing. And just before we go, I wanted to just touch on what has been the reaction to the website. Are you getting emails, or just how is that? What does that look like?
I mean, we've constantly, we've always had an active community of folks who followed our work through the years. And so I'm grateful for that, because even when we mess up, folks respond and they're like, hey, just wanted to bring this to your attention. Or people do share like, hey, I'm based out of here and here's what I'm seeing on the ground. We try to be as engaging as possible. And I think also in our site redesign, we'll continue to find ways in which to do that. And I think a lot of folks, come to us because we've had a story go viral and they're like, I had no idea that you existed, and I'm so glad that you do. Or there's a lot of people who are in spaces where they can't say the things that we say in our reporting. And so they're like, I'm so grateful. Like, I sit at these tables and it's a bunch of BS, or these like big initiatives to support like Black technologists is like such BS. And they can't say that at work because they don't want to lose their jobs, right? So,
yeah.
And so, like, they slide into the DMs and, say, hey, like, yeah, I work for such and such, and that truly is the case, And so, we've have such an active community that continues to grow and continues to also just gut check us as well. And what's also interesting as well is that we get great story ideas too from our audience and people who are doing incredible things or have deep insight and knowledge in their respective spaces, who are like, hey, we're about to launch this thing. This is going to be the implications for the world. Like, I just want to make you aware. And so, and I think that's like kind of the cornerstone of great journalism, right? Like, you get great stories because you have great sources. And so I think a lot of our audience, continues to be just great sources for us.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for joining me today. This has been just a really pleasure. And now, before we go, obviously, I know this is going to sound funny, but please go and plug the plug. So for anyone listening, they know where to find it. I'm sure that happens all the time, by the way.
I love it. No, I love it. I always love the puns and the play on words. Yeah. So please definitely check us out at tpinsights.com. Even before you become a pro member, subscribe to our weekly briefing. It's such a great way to kind of get connected in all things of what's happening in Black in tech, and sort of what issues are at bay that we should be addressing. And then also, of course, we're just at TP Insights across Twitter and Instagram, and where else you can find us. And then I'm just Sherell_Dorsey. So, chat with me at any time, anywhere, any place.
Okay. Thank you so much, everybody. And I'll catch you next time.
This is the Thought Leaders Podcast.